All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour, where in Afghanistan, the Taliban administration has now approved its very first budget for the country. Now, the budget has come for the first time since the hardline Islamists have managed to return back to power on the 15th of August last year. Now, before the Taliban took charge, about 75% of the public spending was funded by foreign aid grants. Notably, international assistance represented almost about 40% of Afghanistan's GDP. Foreign aid made up almost about 80% of the budget when the former American-backed government was in control in Kabul. But now, ever since the Americans made a pretty humiliating exit from Afghanistan, external aid has virtually dried up. But there is humanitarian aid which continues to trickle in, at least in some parts of Afghanistan. And the Taliban budget has made no mention of the foreign assistance. The Taliban's finance ministry spokesperson Ahmed Wali Hakmal has touted the budget as an independent of foreign aid, which, according to him, is a big achievement. The approved budget for the whole of Afghanistan is for $508 million, and it is expected to cover the first quarter of the year 2022. Now, the Islamists are all set to announce their first annual budget in the month of March. The fiscal year has, of course, been shifted to match Afghanistan's solar calendar. The finance ministry spokesperson has also added that the Taliban exchequer is funded by their own resources, and this includes taxation, trade and mining revenue, which is less than 10% of the amount that will be spent on developmental projects, which includes transport infrastructure, and the budget is almost entirely dedicated to funding government institutions. The state workers who have not been paid for several months will start receiving their salaries by the end of January. Women staff who have been refused entrance into their offices will also be reportedly be paid. When Kabul crumbled in the month of August and the Taliban took charge, the Western powers, remember, had frozen billions of dollars in terms of assets that belong to the people of Afghanistan. The Western nations have been grappling with the task of trying to channel the aid that they were earlier trying to send into Afghanistan ever since. But they insist that any kind of aid that is sent into Afghanistan would end up financing the Taliban. Now, millions in Afghanistan are facing hunger as a cash, fuel and food crisis has gripped the impoverished nation. Now, according to the World Food Programme, the director for Afghanistan, the country is facing its worst hunger crisis ever. And according to the United Nations Humanitarian Organization, nearly about 22.8 million people face acute food shortages, while 8.7 million of those are said to be very close to starvation.
All that is coming together into an absolute tsunami of hunger that's just sweeping across the country, and probably is, despite, 5 decades of war, it's probably it is the worst crisis Afghanistan has ever faced.
The United Nations has launched what it describes its biggest ever appeal. It is called on aid for about $5 billion to help 22 million Afghans, and the appeal will be followed by a pledging conference in the middle of March. A number of nations have announced new funding. An additional $308 million will also expected to be coming from the United States. The State of Israel will be chipping in with some $500,000 in terms of aid. There are indications that more funds are expected from other Western nations. Now, as Afghanistan spirals into ever deeper poverty, after it has been cut off from the rest of the world, a growing number of destitute people are making some very desperate decisions. The people who are in dire need of money have taken to risking their lives by even selling their kidneys. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.